Maya Carter stepped into the bank just as the clock struck 10 in the morning. The building was one of those modern structures that stood tall in downtown Chicago, all glass windows and steel frames. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood. Everything about the place screamed professionalism: shiny floors, neatly arranged chairs, and employees walking around in crisp uniforms. It was the kind of environment where people expected things to run smoothly, efficiently, without a hitch. But Maya would soon learn that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. She had been planning this visit for weeks. Today was the day she needed to finalize an important transaction, a deal that could take her tech startup to the next level. Her company, though still growing, had already made waves in the industry. They were working on cutting-edge artificial intelligence software that promised to change how businesses operated. Investors were lining up to get a piece of the pie, and today's meeting at the bank was crucial. She carried a folder filled with documents detailing her financial plans, projections, and partnership agreements. This wasn't just another errand. It was a step toward securing her future. As Maya approached the front desk, she felt confident. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer over a white blouse, paired with black trousers and low heels. Her hair was styled in a neat bun, and her makeup was subtle but elegant. She looked every bit like the successful entrepreneur she was becoming. Yet, as she greeted the receptionist, something in the tone of the response gave her pause. "Hello," Maya said politely, offering a warm smile. "I have an appointment with Mr. Hughes." The receptionist glanced up briefly before returning her attention to the computer screen. "Name?" she asked flatly. "Maya Carter." There was a moment of silence as the receptionist typed away. Then, without looking up again, she replied, "Take a seat. He'll be with you shortly." Maya nodded and moved toward the waiting area. There were several chairs lined up against the wall, each occupied by someone else who seemed to be waiting for their turn. Some flipped through magazines while others scrolled on their phones. Maya chose a spot near the corner, placing her folder carefully on her lap. She pulled out her phone to check emails, trying to stay productive during what she assumed would be a short wait. But minutes turned into an hour and then 2. Other clients came and went, some greeted almost immediately by Richard Hughes himself. Each time the door to his office opened, Maya looked up, hoping he might finally call her name. But instead, she watched as he ushered in person after person, exchanging pleasantries and laughing casually. Most of these individuals were white men or women, dressed in expensive suits or dresses. They didn't seem to face any delays. Their transactions appeared to move along swiftly, leaving Maya feeling increasingly invisible. At one point, a man walked in wearing jeans and a hoodie, a far cry from the polished attire most others sported. Despite his casual appearance, Richard greeted him warmly, shaking his hand and leading him straight into the office. Maya couldn't help but notice the stark difference in treatment. Was it because she was black, or was there something else going on? She tried to push the thought aside, telling herself that maybe there was a legitimate reason for the delay. After all, banks dealt with complicated processes. Maybe her paperwork really did require extra time. Still, doubt lingered in her mind. As the hours dragged on, she grew more frustrated. Not only was this wasting her valuable time, but it also sent a message, one she had encountered too many times before. It was the kind of message that whispered, "You don't belong here." And yet here she was, sitting quietly, refusing to let anyone dim her shine. Around noon, Richard emerged from his office once more. This time he stopped briefly at the reception desk, speaking in hushed tones with the receptionist. Maya leaned forward slightly, catching snippets of their conversation. "Needs to wait a little longer," she heard him say. Her heart sank. So it wasn't just bad timing or misplaced paperwork. He was deliberately keeping her waiting. Despite her mounting irritation, Maya decided to remain composed. Losing her temper wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she focused on observing the dynamics of the room. She noticed how Richard smiled broadly when addressing certain clients, using phrases like Mr. Peterson or Ms. Thompson. His voice carried warmth and respect. But when he occasionally glanced in her direction, his expression shifted, ever so slightly, just enough to convey indifference if not outright dismissal. By early afternoon, hunger pangs began to gnaw at her stomach. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the lack of food only added to her discomfort. Still, she refused to leave. Walking out now would mean giving up, and Maya wasn't the type to give up easily. Besides, she knew the importance of today's transaction. Backing out wasn't an option. Finally, after nearly 3 hours of waiting, Richard approached her. For the first time since she arrived, he addressed her directly. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice clipped and formal. "I apologize for the delay. We've had some unexpected complications with your file. If you'd like, we can reschedule for another day." Maya stared at him, her dark eyes unwavering. She could see right through his excuse. There was no complication. He simply hadn't prioritized her. But rather than confront him outright, she chose her words carefully. "Thank you for letting me know," she replied evenly. "However, I'd prefer to resolve this today if possible. My schedule is quite tight." Richard hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her calm demeanor. He had likely expected anger or frustration, perhaps even tears. Instead, he found himself facing a woman who radiated strength and determination. "Of course," he stammered. "Let me see what I can do." As he retreated to his office, Maya allowed herself a small sigh of relief. At least he was finally taking action. But deep down, she knew this interaction wasn't over. Something told her that today's events would lead to much bigger consequences, not just for her, but for Richard Hughes as well. Little did either of them know, fate had other plans. Unbeknownst to Richard, Maya wasn't just another customer seeking a loan or opening a savings account. She was the CEO of a rapidly rising tech startup, one that had recently caught the eye of major investors. And within the next hour, those very investors would walk through the bank's doors, ready to discuss a multi-million-dollar partnership. When they arrived, Richard's world would change forever, and not necessarily for the better. For now, though, Maya sat quietly, biding her time. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed her skirt, and prepared herself for whatever came next. Whatever happened, she was ready. Just as Maya thought the day couldn't get any worse, the sound of the bank's front door opening caught her attention. A group of people entered, their presence commanding immediate respect. They were impeccably dressed. Men in tailored suits, women in elegant skirts and blazers. Each carried themselves with authority, exuding confidence and purpose. At the head of the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man named Daniel Meyer. His sharp features and piercing gaze made it clear that he was someone used to being in charge. Behind him followed 4 others, all equally impressive in appearance. Richard Hughes, who had been pacing nervously near his office, froze the moment he saw them. For a split second, panic flickered across his face. Then, almost instinctively, he straightened his tie, smoothed his hair, and plastered on a wide smile. "Good afternoon," he exclaimed, rushing toward the group with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Welcome to our branch. How may I assist you today?" Daniel nodded curtly, not returning the smile. "We're here to meet with Ms. Maya Carter," he said, his voice firm and authoritative. "Is she available?" The question hit Richard like a ton of bricks. He blinked rapidly, trying to process what he had just heard. Ms. Maya Carter, the same woman who had been sitting in his lobby for hours, ignored and disrespected? His mind raced as he turned to look at Maya, still seated patiently in the waiting area. She met his gaze briefly, her expression unreadable. Was this some kind of joke? Or worse, a setup? Richard stammered, struggling to find the right words. "Of course. Miss Carter is right over there." He pointed awkwardly toward Maya, his hand trembling slightly. "Please, allow me to escort you to my office." Without waiting for a response, Richard hurried over to Maya, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by forced politeness. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone overly cheerful, "I'm so glad you're still here. Your guests have arrived." Maya stood slowly, gathering her folder and smoothing her blazer. She didn't say anything at first, letting the weight of the situation sink in. Finally, she gave him a small, tight-lipped smile. "Thank you," she said simply, brushing past him to join the group. As they walked toward Richard's office, Maya noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor. Gone was the indifference and casual disregard. Now he was practically bowing, desperate to make amends. It was almost amusing, though Maya kept her emotions carefully masked. She knew better than to let her guard down, especially in situations like this. Once inside the office, Richard ushered everyone to their seats, offering water and coffee with unnecessary fuss. Maya took a seat beside Daniel, while the rest of the board arranged themselves around the table. Richard hovered anxiously nearby, unsure whether to stay or leave. Sensing his discomfort, Daniel finally spoke up. "Thank you, Mr. Hughes. We'll take it from here." Relieved, Richard backed out of the room, closing the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, the atmosphere shifted. The tension eased slightly, and the board members exchanged knowing glances. Daniel turned to Maya, his expression softening. "Apologies for the delay, Maya. I hope we didn't keep you waiting too long." Maya shook her head, though her lips curved into a faint smirk. "Not at all," she replied smoothly. "Though I must admit the experience was enlightening." Daniel chuckled softly, clearly understanding the underlying meaning of her words. "Well, let's get down to business, shall we?" he suggested, opening his briefcase and pulling out a stack of documents. "We've reviewed your proposal, and I must say we're impressed. Your vision for the future of AI technology is truly groundbreaking." Maya nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." Over the next hour, the discussion flowed effortlessly. Maya presented her ideas with clarity and conviction, addressing every question and concern raised by the board. Her confidence was magnetic, drawing everyone in. Even those who had initially been skeptical found themselves nodding along, captivated by her passion and expertise. At one point, Daniel paused to glance at the closed door, where Richard occasionally peeked in, clearly anxious to hear how things were going. "Before we proceed further," Daniel said, turning back to Maya, "there's something we need to address. Trust is a critical component of any partnership, and based on what we've observed today, there may be some concerns regarding the level of professionalism displayed by this institution." Maya raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Oh? What do you mean?" Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say that the way certain individuals conduct themselves can leave a lasting impression, not always a positive one. If we're going to move forward, we'll need assurances that such issues won't arise again." Maya understood exactly what he meant. This wasn't just about her personal experience, it was about setting a standard. Businesses thrived on relationships, and those relationships were built on mutual respect. If the bank wanted to maintain its reputation and secure this lucrative deal, it would need to prove that it valued all clients equally, regardless of race or background. "I completely agree," Maya said, her tone measured. "And I believe there's potential for growth here, but it will require effort from everyone involved." The board members exchanged approving nods, clearly satisfied with her response. Daniel smiled, jotting down a few notes before continuing. "Very well. Let's discuss the next steps." Meanwhile, outside the office, Richard paced nervously. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had messed up badly. Every time he thought about how he had treated Maya earlier, guilt gnawed at him. What if she decided to walk away? What if the board pulled out because of his behavior? The stakes were higher than he had realized, and now he was paying the price for his carelessness. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened. Maya stepped out first, followed by the board members. Richard rushed forward, his face flushed with anxiety. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Daniel regarded him coolly. "The meeting was productive," he replied. "But there are conditions we need to discuss before finalizing anything." Richard swallowed hard, bracing himself for the worst. "Of course, whatever you need." Maya stepped in then, her presence commanding everyone's attention. "Mr. Hughes," she began, her voice steady, We appreciate your efforts to accommodate us today. However, moving forward, we expect transparency and accountability. Specifically, we'd like you to oversee the implementation of diversity training programs within the bank. This isn't negotiable." Richard blinked, taken aback by the request, but he quickly recovered, nodding fervently. "Absolutely. Consider it done." Maya studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity in his eyes. When she seemed satisfied, she extended her hand. "Good, we'll be in touch." As the board members filed out of the bank, Richard watched them go, his heart pounding. He knew he had narrowly avoided disaster, but only because Maya had chosen to give him a second chance. From this point on, he vowed to do better, not just for the sake of the deal, but because it was the right thing to do. For Maya, the day had been a lesson in patience and perseverance. She had walked into the bank expecting resistance, but instead, she had turned the tables, proving that true power came not from anger, but from grace under pressure. And as she stepped onto the sidewalk outside, she allowed herself a small smile. Today was just the beginning. The days that followed the meeting were some of the longest of Richard Hughes's life. He had always considered himself a competent manager, someone who knew how to handle people and situations with ease. But now, he felt like he was walking on thin ice. Every decision he made, every interaction he had seemed to carry extra weight. The image of Maya Carter's calm yet piercing gaze haunted him, reminding him of the mistake he had made. And worse, it reminded him of the consequences. If he didn't fix things quickly, Richard spent hours poring over notes about diversity training programs. At first, he thought it would be a simple task: hire a consultant, schedule a few workshops, and call it a day. But the more he researched, the more he realized how much deeper the issue went. This wasn't just about checking boxes or making the bank look good on paper. It was about creating real change that started with him. He began by reaching out to experts in the field. One name kept coming up: Lisa Monroe, a well-known advocate for workplace equality. Her reputation preceded her, and Richard knew she was exactly the person he needed to guide him through this process. After several attempts, he finally managed to secure a meeting with her. When Lisa arrived at the bank, Richard greeted her with a mix of nerves and determination. She was a petite woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. Her no-nonsense attitude put Richard on edge immediately. As they sat down in his office, she wasted no time getting to the point. "So, Lisa," began, leaning forward slightly, "tell me why you're doing this." Richard hesitated, unsure how to answer. Was it because he wanted to save face? Because he feared losing the deal with Maya's company? Or was it something deeper, something he hadn't fully admitted to himself yet? I want to make sure everyone feels respected and valued here," he said finally, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't want anyone to feel the way Ms. Carter did." Lisa studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. "Good. That's a start. But let me be clear, you can't fake this. If you're not genuinely committed to change, it'll show. And trust me, people will notice." Her words hit home. Richard realized that this wasn't just about fixing a single mistake. It was about confronting the biases he hadn't even known he had. Over the next few weeks, Lisa worked closely with him, challenging him to reflect on his actions and attitudes. She introduced him to employees from different backgrounds, encouraging him to listen to their stories and experiences. Some of what he heard shocked him. Stories of being overlooked for promotions, of subtle comments that stung more than outright insults, of feeling invisible in a place where they should have belonged. At the same time, Richard reached out to Maya. He sent her a formal apology letter, outlining the steps he planned to take to improve the bank's culture. To his surprise, she responded, not with anger or resentment, but with encouragement. "I appreciate your efforts," she wrote back. "Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. I'm willing to give you the chance to prove that you mean what you say." Her response gave Richard hope, but it also reinforced the pressure he felt. He couldn't afford to slip up again. The board was watching, Maya was watching, and most importantly, His own conscience was watching. As the diversity training program took shape, Richard threw himself into the work. He attended every workshop, participated in discussions, and even volunteered to mentor young employees from underrepresented communities. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he felt defensive, frustrated, or overwhelmed. But slowly he began to see the bigger picture. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Richard stayed late at the bank to review feedback from the staff. Many of them expressed gratitude for the changes being implemented, while others shared concerns about whether the program would last. Reading their comments, Richard felt a strange sense of pride. For the first time in years, he felt like he was making a difference, not just for the bank, but for the people who worked there. Meanwhile, Maya continued to push forward with her own plans. With the board's support, her company secured the funding it needed to expand its operations. News of her success spread quickly, earning her recognition in both tech circles and beyond. Yet, despite her growing fame, she remained grounded, using her platform to advocate for diversity and inclusion in the industry. A few months later, Richard received an invitation to attend a keynote speech Maya was giving at a local business conference. The event was packed with hundreds of attendees eager to hear her insights. When Richard arrived, he spotted her immediately, standing at the podium, poised and confident as ever. In her speech, Maya spoke candidly about the challenges she had faced as a Black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated industry. She talked about resilience, perseverance, and the importance of holding institutions accountable. But she also emphasized the potential for growth and redemption, sharing examples of organizations that had successfully transformed their cultures. As leaders, she concluded, we have a responsibility to create spaces where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. Because when we embrace diversity, we unlock possibilities we never knew existed. Her words resonated deeply with Richard. As he listened, he realized how far he had come since that fateful day in the bank. He wasn't perfect, he knew he still had a lot to learn, but he was committed to doing better. And for the first time in a long time, he felt proud of himself. After the speech, Richard approached Maya cautiously. "Ms. Carter," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for everything. You've inspired me to be a better leader and a better person." Maya shook his hand firmly, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you for listening," she replied. "That's the first step toward real change." As they parted ways, Richard couldn't help but smile. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it head-on. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that Maya's quiet strength had been the catalyst for his transformation. Months passed since the day Richard Hughes first realized he needed to change. The bank had undergone significant transformations under his leadership, or rather, under Lisa Monroe's guidance. Richard wasn't naive enough to think he deserved credit for everything. He knew that without her expertise and relentless push, he would have stumbled countless times. But still, he took pride in the fact that he had embraced the challenge instead of running away from it. The diversity training program had become a cornerstone of the bank's new identity. It wasn't just a one-time event. It was an ongoing process designed to foster understanding and respect among employees. Workshops were held regularly, covering topics like unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and inclusive communication. Feedback sessions allowed staff members to voice their concerns or share positive experiences. Slowly but surely, the workplace began to feel different, more open, more welcoming. Richard himself had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. At first, he viewed the program as a way to save face after his poor treatment of Maya Carter. But as time went on, he started seeing its value beyond damage control. Listening to stories from his employees opened his eyes to struggles he'd never considered before. For example, there was Marcus, a young Black man who worked in customer service. During a workshop, Marcus shared how often he felt dismissed by clients who assumed he didn't understand financial matters. Or Emily, a Latina woman in accounting who talked about being mistaken for administrative staff despite her senior position. These stories stayed with Richard long after the workshops ended. They reminded him why this work mattered, not because It looked good on paper, but because it made life better for real people. And while he couldn't undo past mistakes, he could ensure they weren't repeated. One afternoon, Richard found himself sitting across from Daniel Meyer in a quiet cafe near the bank. Daniel had requested the meeting to discuss the progress of the partnership between Maya's company and the investment firm. Though the deal had been finalized months ago, Daniel wanted to check in personally to see how things were going. "I must admit," Daniel said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, "I wasn't sure what to expect when we handed you this challenge. To be honest, I thought you might try to take shortcuts." Richard nodded, not offended by the honesty. "I get it," he replied. "If I were in your shoes, I'd feel the same way. But I can tell you this. I've learned a lot through this process, not just about running a business, but about being human." Daniel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Care to elaborate?" Richard hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "When Ms. Carter walked into my bank that day, I saw her as, well, I don't even know how to describe it. Maybe as someone less important than the other clients waiting. That sounds terrible now, but it's true. What I didn't realize then was that she wasn't just a customer. She was a leader, a trailblazer. And by treating her poorly, I wasn't just disrespecting her, I was disrespecting everything she stood for." Daniel listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When Richard finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're right," he said finally. "Maya is extraordinary. But here's the thing. You're starting to sound pretty extraordinary yourself. Change isn't easy, especially when it forces you to confront uncomfortable truths. The fact that you've stuck with this tells me you're serious." Richard felt a flicker of hope. "Does that mean you're happy with how things are going?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Let's just say I'm cautiously optimistic. Keep doing what you're doing, and maybe one day we'll consider expanding our relationship with your bank." With that, the two men shook hands and parted ways. As Richard walked back to the bank, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't perfect. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but it was progress. And sometimes progress was enough. Back at the bank, Richard continued to implement changes. One of his proudest initiatives was creating a mentorship program for young professionals from underrepresented communities. He partnered with local schools and community organizations to identify talented individuals who might otherwise struggle to break into the finance industry. These mentees were paired with experienced employees who could guide them through the complexities of banking. Among the participants was a young woman named Jasmine, who quickly became one of Richard's favorite success stories. She was smart, driven, and full of potential, but she lacked confidence, unsure if she truly belonged in such a competitive field. Over time, Richard worked closely with her, encouraging her to trust her instincts and speak up when she had ideas. By the end of the program, Jasmine had secured a permanent position at the bank, earning praise from colleagues and clients alike. Seeing Jasmine thrive gave Richard a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his role as a leader wasn't just about managing numbers or pleasing shareholders. It was about nurturing talent and creating opportunities for others to succeed. Meanwhile, Maya's company continued to flourish. Her groundbreaking AI technology had gained widespread attention, attracting partnerships with major corporations around the world. Despite her growing responsibilities, she remained committed to advocating for diversity in tech. She frequently spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and collaborated with organizations working toward similar goals. One day, Richard received an email from Maya inviting him to attend a panel discussion she was hosting. The topic: How Leaders Can Drive Real Change. Intrigued, Richard accepted the invitation, eager to hear what she had to say. The event took place in a grand auditorium packed with attendees. Maya sat alongside three other panelists, a CEO, a nonprofit founder, and a government official, all discussing strategies for fostering inclusivity in various industries. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she turned her attention directly to Richard, who was seated in the front row. "Change starts with accountability," she said, her voice steady and powerful. It starts with leaders admitting they don't have all the answers and being willing to listen. I've seen firsthand how transformative that can be. Her gaze lingered on Richard for a moment longer before shifting back to the audience. Richard felt a lump rise in his throat. He knew she was talking about him, and he also knew she was giving him a second chance to prove himself. After the panel ended, Richard approached Maya once again. This time their conversation felt lighter, less formal. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "For everything." Maya smiled softly. "Don't thank me yet," she teased. "There's still work to do." Richard laughed, feeling a genuine connection for the first time. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, with humility, determination, and a newfound commitment to making the world a better place. Nearly a year had passed since the day Maya Carter walked into Richard Hughes's bank, only to be kept waiting for hours. So much had changed since then. Not just within the bank, but within Richard himself. What began as an embarrassing mistake had evolved into a journey of self-reflection, learning, and transformation. And now, as he stood in the same building where it all started, Richard couldn't help but feel a sense of pride mixed with humility. Today was a special occasion. The bank was hosting its first ever Diversity Day, an event designed to celebrate the progress they had made over the past year and inspire further growth. Employees from every department were invited, along with local community leaders and representatives from partner organizations. At the heart of the celebration was Maya Carter, who had graciously accepted Richard's invitation to speak as the keynote guest. As Richard watched the attendees file into the main hall, he noticed how different the room felt compared to last year. The faces were more diverse. Men and women of various races, ages, and backgrounds sat side by side, chatting animatedly. Posters promoting inclusivity lined the walls, and tables displayed brochures about upcoming mentorship programs and community outreach initiatives. It was clear that the bank had undergone a cultural shift, one that reflected the values Maya had championed during their partnership. When it was time for the program to begin, Richard took the stage briefly to welcome everyone. His speech was short but heartfelt. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady, "I made a mistake, a big one. I treated someone unfairly because of my own biases I didn't even realize I had. That person could have walked away and never looked back. But instead, she gave me a chance to do better. Today, we're here to honor that second chance and continue building a workplace and a world where everyone feels valued." The audience erupted into applause, and Richard stepped aside to make way for Maya. As she approached the podium, the energy in the room shifted. People leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear what she had to say. Maya smiled warmly before beginning her speech. "When I first came to this bank," she said, her voice resonating through the hall, "I didn't expect much. Honestly, I expected to be treated like I often am, like I don't belong. And for a while, that's exactly what happened." She paused, glancing at Richard, who nodded slightly, acknowledging her words. But something remarkable followed. Instead of brushing off my experience, Mr. Hughes chose to listen. He chose to act. And because of that decision, this bank has become a shining example of what's possible when people commit to change. Maya went on to share stories of other companies and individuals who had embraced diversity and inclusion, highlighting both successes and challenges. She spoke passionately about the importance of creating spaces where everyone could thrive, regardless of their background. Her message was simple yet powerful. Change begins with small actions, but those actions can lead to extraordinary results. As Maya wrapped up her speech, she turned her attention to the employees in the audience. "You are the future of this institution," she said firmly. "Every interaction you have, every decision you make, it matters. You have the power to shape not only this bank, but also the lives of the people you serve. Use that power wisely." The crowd erupted into applause once again, many standing to show their appreciation. Maya stepped down from the podium, shaking hands and exchanging smiles with those who approached her afterward. Richard waited patiently until the crowd thinned out before making his way over to her. "Thank you," he said, extending his hand. for coming today, for sharing your story, and for believing in us, even when we didn't deserve it." Maya shook his hand firmly, her expression thoughtful. "Believe me, Richard, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think you were sincere. This isn't just about fixing mistakes. It's about creating something meaningful, something lasting." Her words stayed with Richard long after the event ended. Over the following weeks, he continued to push for improvements within the bank. The diversity training program expanded, reaching new branches and departments. Employee feedback showed growing satisfaction, and clients began praising the bank for its welcoming atmosphere. Local media outlets even featured articles about the institution's efforts, calling it a model for others to follow. Richard also found himself mentoring young professionals more frequently, including Jasmine, whose career had taken off thanks to the mentorship program. Watching her grow into a confident leader filled him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced before. He realized that true leadership wasn't about holding power. It was about empowering others. Meanwhile, Maya's company reached new heights, solidifying its reputation as a pioneer in AI technology. Her advocacy work earned her recognition far beyond the tech industry, and she became a sought-after speaker and advisor. Yet despite her success, she remained grounded, always reminding herself of the struggles that had shaped her journey. One evening, several months after the Diversity Day event, Richard received an unexpected email from Maya. Attached was an invitation to attend the launch of a new initiative, a coalition aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion across multiple industries. The coalition would bring together leaders from finance, technology, education, and beyond to share resources, strategies, and ideas. "I'd be honored if you joined us," Maya wrote in the message. "Your story proves that change is possible, even in places where it seems least likely." Richard stared at the screen for a moment, overwhelmed by the invitation. Then he typed a reply. "Count me in." The coalition's launch event took place in a grand conference center, filled with influential figures from all walks of life. As Richard mingled with the attendees, he couldn't help but marvel at how far he had come. A year ago, he had been a man oblivious to his own biases, clinging to outdated notions of professionalism. Now he stood among visionaries and changemakers, ready to contribute to a greater cause. During the opening remarks, Maya took the stage once again, addressing the crowd with her trademark poise. "We're here today," she said, "because we believe in the power of collaboration. Together we can break down barriers, challenge stereotypes, and build a future where everyone has a seat at the table." As Richard listened, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. Surrounded by allies and inspired by leaders like Maya, he was ready to face whatever came next. When the event concluded, Richard lingered near the exit, hoping to catch one last word with Maya. When she finally approached, he smiled warmly. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" he asked. Maya nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "It has to be. The work never stops, but neither does the hope." With that, they parted ways, each returning to their respective roles as agents of change. For Richard, the journey had transformed him, not just as a banker, but as a person. And though he knew he would always carry the lessons of the past with him, he also knew that the future held endless possibilities. The bank, too, continued to thrive under his leadership. Clients praised its inclusive culture, and employees felt empowered to bring their whole selves to work. What had once been a symbol of exclusion had become a beacon of progress, a testament to the fact that even the smallest seeds of change could grow into something extraordinary. And so the story of Richard Hughes and Maya Carter came full circle. From a single moment of oversight emerged a legacy of accountability, growth, and hope. It was proof that no matter how flawed we may be, redemption is always within reach, if we're willing to take the first step.